The morning sun cast long shadows across the bombed-out buildings of Stalingrad as Lyudmila Pavlichenko crouched behind a pile of rubble. The 25-year-old history student had never imagined she would be here, rifle in hand, hunting the most dangerous predators on the battlefield. Just 6 months earlier, she'd been studying at Kiev University, dreaming of becoming a historian. Now she was about to become history herself. The German invasion had changed everything. When Hitler's forces crossed into Soviet territory in June 1941, Lyudmila knew her peaceful life was over. She had always been different from other girls her age. While they played with dolls, she had learned to shoot at her local shooting club. Her grandfather, a veteran of the Great War, had taught her that a steady hand and patient mind were more powerful than any weapon. Women belong in the hospitals, not on the front lines, the recruitment officer had said when she first tried to enlist. He looked at her small frame and gentle face, unable to imagine this young woman as a soldier. Lyudmila had smiled politely, but inside her determination burned like fire. She had brought her marksmanship certificates and shooting club records, proving she could hit a target at 400 meters without missing. The officer finally agreed to let her join, but only after she demonstrated her skills at the shooting range. With dozens of male recruits watching and some even laughing, Lyudmila took her position. The target was placed 300 meters away, a distance that challenged even experienced marksmen. She steadied her breathing, felt her heartbeat slow, and squeezed the trigger. Bullseye. Again. And again. 5 perfect shots in a row. The laughter stopped. Her first assignment was with the 25th Rifle Division, defending the city of Odessa on the Black Sea coast. The port city was crucial for Soviet supply lines, and the Germans were desperate to capture it. For weeks, the battle raged through the streets, with both sides taking heavy casualties. It was here that Lyudmila would face her greatest challenge yet. The German snipers had arrived with the main assault force. These were not ordinary soldiers, but specially trained hunters who had terrorized Soviet forces across Eastern Europe. They used the latest German optics and had been trained in the forests of Bavaria. Their reputation preceded them like a dark cloud. In just 3 days, they had killed over 40 Soviet officers and key personnel, creating panic among the defending troops. "They're like ghosts," whispered Private Volkov as he crouched next to Lyudmila in their makeshift position on the 3rd floor of a damaged apartment building. Through the broken window, they could see the German positions across the square. Nobody knows where they're shooting from until it's too late. Lyudmila studied the enemy lines through her scope. The Germans had set up multiple sniper nests in the ruins of what used to be a school and a church. She could see the glint of their scopes in the morning light, but identifying exact positions was nearly impossible. These snipers were professionals who understood concealment and misdirection. Her first encounter with the enemy, snipers, came at dawn on September 15th. She had been observing a suspected sniper position in the church tower when she noticed a tiny movement in the shadows. Her training kicked in automatically. She adjusted her scope, controlled her breathing, and prepared to take the shot. But just as she was about to fire, a bullet whistled past her head so close she felt the wind from it. The enemy sniper had spotted her first. Now it was a deadly game of cat and mouse, with both hunters trying to locate each other while remaining hidden. Lyudmila rolled away from the window just as another bullet shattered the concrete where her head had been moments before. Her heart pounded, but her mind remained clear. This was what all her training had prepared her for. For the next 2 hours, neither sniper could get a clear shot. They played a dangerous game of peek and hide, each trying to draw the other into making a mistake. Lyudmila used mirrors and shadows to observe her enemy's position, while constantly changing her own location within the building. She learned to think like her opponent, predicting where he would expect her to appear next. The breakthrough came when she noticed the enemy sniper's pattern. Every few minutes, he would shift slightly to check different angles, and each time, a tiny reflection would flash from his scope. Lyudmila timed these movements, counted the seconds between each shift, and prepared her strategy. When the next reflection appeared, she was ready. Her shot was perfect. The German sniper slumped forward, his rifle clattering down from the church tower. But there was no time to celebrate. Within seconds, bullets began raining down on her position from multiple directions. The other German snipers had revealed themselves, and now they were all focused on eliminating her. Lyudmila grabbed her rifle and moved quickly through the building, using her knowledge of the structure to stay ahead of the incoming fire. She had studied every room, every hallway, every possible escape route. This preparation now saved her life as bullets followed her path through the building. By evening, the battle had claimed 3 more German snipers, but Lyudmila knew this was just the beginning. Intelligence reports indicated that the Germans had sent their best marksmen to Odessa, men who had hundreds of confirmed kills across Europe. They weren't just trying to win a battle. They were trying to break the spirit of the Soviet defenders. That night, as she cleaned her rifle and prepared for the next day, Lyudmila thought about the enemy she now faced. These weren't random soldiers, but carefully selected killers who had been trained to spread fear and chaos. They had technology, experience, and a reputation that made grown men tremble, but they had never faced anyone like her. While they had been trained in military academies and shooting schools, Lyudmila had learned her skills from necessity and passion. She understood that this wasn't just about marksmanship. It was about intelligence, patience, and the will to survive. The enemy snipers had terrorized Soviet forces for months, but their reign of terror was about to meet its greatest challenge. As she settled into her sleeping position, Lyudmila made a promise to herself and to her fallen comrades. The German snipers had seemed invincible, but she would prove that even the most dangerous predators could be hunted. Tomorrow the real hunt would begin. The second day brought new challenges and deadlier opponents. Intelligence had identified at least 8 German snipers operating in the Odessa sector, each responsible for dozens of Soviet casualties. Their leader was a man known only as the Wolf, a veteran marksman who had served on the Western Front before being transferred to the Eastern Campaign. His reputation was legendary among German forces and terrifying to his enemies. Lyudmila spent the early morning hours studying aerial photographs and building layouts, planning her approach like a chess master, considering her next moves. She had learned that successful sniper warfare wasn't about being the fastest shooter, but about being the smartest hunter. Every position had to be carefully chosen, every movement precisely calculated. Her new position was on the 4th floor of a bombed-out factory, giving her a commanding view of the German-held territory. The building had been abandoned for weeks, and the Germans had grown comfortable thinking it was empty. This would be her advantage. She arrived before dawn, moving through the rubble-strewn corridors like a ghost, making no sound that might betray her presence. The first target appeared just after sunrise. Through her scope, she could see a German sniper setting up his position in what remained of a hotel balcony. He was confident, maybe too confident, taking his time to arrange his equipment. Lyudmila watched him for nearly an hour, learning his habits and timing his movements. When she finally took the shot, it was clean and silent. The German sniper collapsed without making a sound, and his comrades didn't immediately realize what had happened. But Lyudmila knew she had only minutes before they would start looking for her. She quickly moved to a different window, already planning her next strike. The Germans were faster to react than she had expected. Within 10 minutes, bullets were hitting the factory walls, but they were shooting blindly, hoping to get lucky. Lyudmila used this chaos to her advantage, moving through the building while they wasted ammunition on empty positions. She counted at least 4 different sniper positions firing at her building, which meant there were still plenty of targets left. Her second kill came from an unexpected angle. While the German snipers were focused on the upper floors of the factory, Lyudmila had moved to the basement and found a small window that gave her a view of their flanking positions. From this low angle, she could see under their cover, spotting a sniper who thought he was completely hidden behind a concrete barrier. The shot was more difficult because of the angle and distance, but Lyudmila had practiced these kinds of shots for years. She calculated the trajectory, adjusted for wind and gravity, and squeezed the trigger. Another German sniper would never threaten Soviet soldiers again. By midday, the enemy had realized they were being hunted by someone exceptional. The random shooting stopped and a more organized response began. Lyudmila could hear German voices shouting orders, and she saw movement as they repositioned their forces. They were trying to surround the factory, cutting off her escape routes. This was when the Wolf made his appearance. Through her scope, Lyudmila saw a figure moving with professional precision through the ruins across the square. Unlike the other snipers, this one didn't make any unnecessary movements. Every step was calculated, every pause purposeful. She knew immediately that this was a different class of opponent. The wolf had studied the battlefield and correctly identified her general location. Instead of trying to storm the factory like his subordinates wanted, he began a patient siege. He positioned his remaining snipers to watch all the exits while he worked on finding her exact position. This was no longer a hunt. It had become a siege. For 3 hours, neither side moved. Lyudmila knew that time was not on her side. The longer she stayed in one place, the more likely the Germans were to locate her precisely. But she also knew that moving carelessly would expose her to multiple enemies. She needed a plan that would allow her to break out while eliminating more targets. Her opportunity came when she noticed the German snipers communicating with each other using mirror signals. They were being careful not to use radio communications that might be intercepted, but their light signals created tiny flashes that she could track. By following these signals, she was able to map out their positions more accurately than she had before. The breakthrough came when one of the German snipers made a crucial mistake. He had been holding his position for hours and was getting careless with his concealment. When he shifted to get more comfortable, Lyudmila caught the movement and immediately identified his exact location. More importantly, she realized that his position had a blind spot that she could use to her advantage. Instead of taking the shot immediately, Lyudmila decided to use this sniper as bait. She made a deliberate noise, scraping her rifle against a piece of concrete just loud enough for the Germans to hear. The sniper she had spotted immediately turned toward the sound, exposing himself even more. But instead of shooting him, she tracked his line of sight and identified where the wolf was positioned. The master sniper had positioned himself perfectly to cover his subordinate, ready to eliminate anyone who tried to take advantage of the exposed position. It was a clever trap, and Lyudmila realized she would have walked right into it if she had acted impulsively. The wolf was indeed a worthy opponent. Now she had to make a choice that would determine the outcome of the entire engagement. She could take the safe shot and eliminate the exposed sniper, or she could attempt something far more dangerous but potentially decisive. If she could eliminate the wolf, the other German snipers would lose their coordination and leadership. Lyudmila spent another hour studying the wolf's position and behavior. She noticed that every few minutes he would slightly adjust his scope to check different angles. During these adjustments, there was a brief moment when he was vulnerable, but the timing had to be perfect, and she would only get one chance. As the afternoon sun began to cast longer shadows, Lyudmila made her decision. She positioned herself for the most difficult shot of her life, aiming not at where the wolf was, but where he would be in 3 seconds when he made his regular scope adjustment. Everything depended on her timing and her ability to predict human behavior. The moment came just as she had calculated. The wolf began his regular adjustment, moving his scope slightly to the left to check a different angle. Lyudmila's bullet traveled the 600 meters between them in less than a second, arriving precisely when and where she had intended. The wolf collapsed. His legendary career ended by a 25-year-old history student who had learned to think like her enemies. But Lyudmila knew the battle was far from over. She had eliminated the German sniper's leader, but several dangerous marksmen still remained, and now they would be motivated by revenge as much as duty. The death of the wolf sent shockwaves through the German sniper teams. Without their leader's tactical guidance, the remaining marksmen became more aggressive but less coordinated. This change in behavior gave Lyudmila new opportunities, but it also made her enemies more unpredictable and dangerous. News of her success had spread quickly through Soviet lines. Soldiers who had been terrorized by the German snipers for weeks now looked to her with a mixture of awe and hope. But Lyudmila knew that reputation could be as dangerous as it was helpful. The Germans now knew they were facing a skilled opponent, and they would adapt their tactics accordingly. On the third day, the Germans tried a new approach. Instead of using their snipers independently, they began working in coordinated pairs. While one sniper took a shot, his partner would immediately relocate to a predetermined position, making it nearly impossible for Lyudmila to predict where the next threat would come from. This new tactic was immediately effective. When Lyudmila tried to engage a German sniper positioned in a church bell tower, his partner fired at her from a completely different direction. The bullet missed her by inches, and she realized that the enemy had learned from their losses. They were no longer underestimating her abilities. The psychological pressure was intense. Every window could hide an enemy. Every shadow might conceal a deadly threat. Lyudmila had to constantly move through the ruins, never staying in one position for more than a few minutes. The physical strain was exhausting, but the mental pressure was even worse. One small mistake, one moment of carelessness, and she would join the dozens of Soviet soldiers who had already fallen to German snipers. Her first breakthrough on the third day came from an unexpected source. A young Soviet scout named Alexei had been observing German positions when he noticed something unusual. The enemy snipers were using a complex system of rope signals to communicate with each other, pulling on nearly invisible cords to send messages between positions. "They're like puppeteers," Alexei whispered as he showed Lyudmila the thin lines running between buildings. "Pull once for target spotted, twice for changing position, by 3 times for enemy eliminated." He had spent hours watching and decoding their system, risking his life to gather this intelligence. This information was invaluable. By watching for these signal lines, Lyudmila could predict German movements and coordinate her own attacks more effectively. She spent the morning mapping out the entire communication network, identifying at least 6 different sniper positions connected by this rope system. Her first test of this new knowledge came when she spotted movement in what appeared to be an empty building. Through her scope, she could see the faint outline of a rope leading from a window to another position across the street. She waited patiently, and sure enough, the rope moved 3 times in quick succession. The German sniper thought he had just eliminated a target and was signaling his success to his partner. But Lyudmila had seen no Soviet casualties in that area, which meant the German was either mistaken or lying. More importantly, his signal had revealed his exact position. She adjusted her scope, controlled her breathing, and took the shot. The rope went slack as the German sniper fell, his communication system now working against his own forces. The Germans quickly realized their communication network had been compromised. Within hours, all the visible ropes had been cut or removed, and the enemy snipers returned to radio silence. But Lyudmila had already gained valuable intelligence about their positions and patterns. Her next challenge came from an unexpected quarter. German command had brought in a sniper from the Africa Corps, a desert warfare specialist who had been fighting British forces in North Africa. This sniper, known as Desert Fox, had experience fighting in completely different terrain and conditions, which made his tactics unpredictable. Desert Fox had learned to fight in open terrain where concealment was limited, making him exceptionally good at using minimal cover and shooting from positions that seemed impossible. When he arrived in Odessa, he immediately identified several positions that the other German snipers had overlooked. Lyudmila first encountered Desert Fox when bullets began hitting her position from an angle that should have been impossible. According to her maps and observations, there was no suitable sniper position in that direction. But somehow the enemy had found a way to get a clear shot at her hiding place. It took her 2 hours to figure out how he was doing it. Desert Fox had positioned himself in a partially collapsed building, using the rubble and debris to create a firing position that was nearly invisible from any angle. He was shooting through gaps in the wreckage that were so small they seemed like shadows rather than openings. The technical skill required for such shooting was extraordinary. Desert Fox had to calculate not only the normal factors like distance and wind, but also how his bullets would be affected by passing through narrow openings and around obstacles. It was like trying to thread a needle at 400 meters distance. Finding him was only half the battle. Lyudmila realized that taking a shot at Desert Fox would be nearly impossible using conventional methods. His position was too well protected, and any direct approach would expose her to his deadly accurate fire. She needed to think creatively. Her solution came from remembering her grandfather's hunting stories. He had told her about hunting foxes in winter, explaining that sometimes you couldn't chase the fox directly. Instead, you had to predict where it would go and be waiting when it arrived. Lyudmila studied Desert Fox's position and realized that his greatest strength was also his weakness. His hiding place was so cleverly concealed that he probably only had 1 or 2 ways to escape if discovered. She identified the most likely escape route and positioned herself to cover it, then arranged for Soviet artillery to shell the area around his position. The plan worked perfectly. When the artillery began falling near his hiding place, Desert Fox was forced to abandon his position and move to his predetermined escape route. Lyudmila was waiting. Her shot caught him halfway between his old position and safety, ending the career of one of Germany's most skilled desert fighters. But the victory came at a cost. The artillery barrage had also revealed Lyudmila's general location to the remaining German snipers. As Desert Fox fell, bullets immediately began hitting all around her position. The enemy was closing in and she was running out of places to hide. The situation was becoming desperate. 3 days of constant pressure had taken their toll, and Lyudmila was beginning to feel the strain. Her ammunition was running low, her food was almost gone, and she hadn't had more than a few minutes of real sleep since the battle began. Worse still, German reinforcements were arriving. Through her scope, she could see fresh sniper teams taking positions throughout the enemy sector. What had started as a battle against 8 German marksmen was becoming a siege against twice that number. As night fell on the 3rd day, Lyudmila had to make a critical decision. She could try to hold her current positions and continue the battle of attrition, but she was clearly outnumbered and running low on supplies. Alternatively, she could attempt a risky nighttime operation to eliminate several targets at once, potentially ending the German sniper threat but risking everything on a single gamble. Lyudmila chose the gamble. As darkness fell over Odessa, she began preparing for the most dangerous operation of her career. Night fighting was completely different from daytime sniping, requiring different skills and presenting unique challenges. But it also offered opportunities that daylight never provided. The German snipers had established a routine during the previous nights. They would maintain 2 or 3 observation posts while the others rested, rotating every few hours to stay alert. Lyudmila had been watching this pattern, and she knew that between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m. their vigilance was at its lowest point. Her plan was audacious and terrifying. Instead of picking off individual targets from a safe distance, she would infiltrate the German-held sector and eliminate multiple snipers at close range. It meant abandoning the safety of her long-range rifle and relying on stealth, speed, and a pistol for most of the work. Moving through no man's land at night required skills she had never used before. Every step had to be silent, every movement calculated to avoid detection by German sentries. The battlefield was littered with debris that could betray her position with a single misplaced footstep. Broken glass, scattered shell casings, and chunks of concrete created a deadly obstacle course in the darkness. Her first target was a German sniper positioned in the remains of a bakery. She had watched him establish his routine over the past 2 days, and she knew he would be alone until his partner relieved him at 3 a.m. The building had been heavily damaged, with multiple holes in the walls that she could use for entry. Reaching the bakery unseen took over an hour of careful movement. Lyudmila crawled the last 50 meters on her belly, using shell craters and rubble piles for cover. The German sniper was positioned on the 2nd floor, and she could see the faint glow of his cigarette through a broken window. Getting into the building was easier than she had expected. The explosion that had damaged the bakery had also created several gaps in the ground floor walls. She slipped through one of these openings and began climbing the debris-filled staircase, testing each step before putting her full weight on it. The German sniper never knew what hit him. Lyudmila approached from behind while he was focused on watching the Soviet positions. A quick, silent strike with her combat knife, and the first target was eliminated without alerting his comrades. But now came the dangerous part. She had to cross over 200 meters of open ground to reach her second target, and dawn was still hours away. The German sniper positions were all watching for movement in this area, and any mistake would bring deadly fire from multiple directions. Her solution was to use the Germans' own tactics against them. She had noticed that they often used flares to illuminate suspected enemy positions. By timing her movements to coincide with these flares, she could use the bright light to create deeper shadows that would conceal her movement. The technique worked, but it required perfect timing and nerves of steel. When a flare burst overhead, Lyudmila had to freeze completely, trusting that the shadows would hide her. When the light faded, she had only seconds to move before the next flare might appear. Her second target was positioned in a church that had lost most of its roof to artillery fire. The German sniper had created a nest among the fallen beams and broken stone, giving him excellent concealment and fields of fire. But Lyudmila had noticed something during her daytime observations that he probably didn't know about. The church had a crypt that connected to the basement of the adjacent building. If she could reach that building unseen, she might be able to approach the church from below. It was a desperate plan, but desperation was becoming her closest companion. The basement entrance was guarded by a single German soldier who was fighting to stay awake. Lyudmila watched him for 20 minutes, timing his moments of inattention. When his head nodded forward in exhaustion, she struck quickly and silently. The crypt was a nightmare of darkness and debris. She had to feel her way through collapsed stone and rotting wood, guided only by her memory of the building's layout. Several times she had to backtrack when passages were blocked, and once she nearly triggered a booby trap left by retreating Soviet forces. When she finally emerged in the church basement, she could hear the German sniper moving around above her. He was repositioning his equipment, preparing for the dawn engagement that he would never see. Lyudmila climbed the stone steps carefully, her pistol ready. The second elimination was as silent as the first, but this time she made a crucial discovery. The German sniper had been carrying detailed maps showing all the enemy positions in the sector. Not only did this give her invaluable intelligence, but it also revealed something that chilled her blood. The Germans had identified her general location and were planning a coordinated assault at dawn. 16 snipers and a full infantry platoon were going to surround and eliminate her. She had less than 2 hours to either escape or turn the tables completely. Looking at the maps, Lyudmila realized she had been thinking about this battle all wrong. She had been focused on eliminating individual snipers when she should have been targeting their command and control structure. The maps showed her where. The German sniper commander had established his headquarters. The command post was in a heavily fortified position that would normally be impossible to assault. But Lyudmila now had something no one expected: detailed intelligence about German positions and plans. More importantly, she had proven to herself that she could move through enemy territory undetected. Her new plan was even more audacious than the first. Instead of trying to pick off individual snipers, she would strike at the heart of their operation. If she could eliminate the commander and destroy their communication equipment, the coordinated assault at dawn would become a confused mess of individual units operating without central control. The German command post was located in the basement of what had been Odessa's main post office. The building was heavily guarded, with at least 8 soldiers providing security around the perimeter. But the maps showed her something the guards didn't know. The old postal service had built a tunnel system for secure mail delivery that connected to several surrounding buildings. Finding the tunnel entrance took precious time that she couldn't afford to waste. Dawn was approaching, and soon the German assault would begin whether she was ready or not. But finally she located a concealed entrance in the basement of a nearby apartment building. The tunnel was barely wide enough for one person and filled with years of debris and stagnant water. She had to crawl through sections that were completely flooded, holding her breath and hoping the passage wouldn't collapse on top of her. But eventually she emerged in the basement of the post office, directly below the German command center. Above her, she could hear multiple voices speaking in German. From the tone and urgency of the conversation, she could tell they were finalizing plans for the dawn assault. In less than an hour, those plans would be put into action, and she would face impossible odds. But Lyudmila had one advantage they didn't know about. She was already inside their most secure facility, armed with detailed knowledge of their entire operation, and motivated by the knowledge that this might be her only chance to survive the coming battle. The German command post was directly above her, separated only by wooden floorboards and the element of surprise. Lyudmila could hear at least 4 distinct voices, including one that spoke with the authority of command. Through gaps in the floorboards, she could see the glow of electric lamps and the shadows of men moving around maps and communication equipment. Time was running out. The eastern horizon was beginning to show the faintest hint of dawn, and she could hear increased activity throughout the German sector. Soldiers were moving to their assault positions, and radio chatter was increasing as final preparations were made. Lyudmila studied the layout above her, trying to understand the room's configuration from the shadows and sounds. The commander appeared to be positioned near what sounded like a radio setup, while his staff officers were gathered around what was probably a map table. She would have one chance to eliminate multiple targets before they could react or call for help. Her approach had to be perfect. The floorboards were old and might creak under her weight, alerting the Germans to her presence. She needed to find the strongest sections of the floor, probably near the support beams, and move with absolute silence. The breakthrough came when she found a section where the floorboards had been damaged by artillery concussion. Several boards were loose, creating a gap just wide enough for her to see into the room above. Through this opening, she could observe the entire German command staff and plan her attack. 4 officers were in the room, including a colonel who was clearly in charge of the entire sniper operation. They had detailed maps of Odessa spread across a large table, with red pins marking Soviet positions and blue pins showing German sniper locations. She could see her own suspected positions marked with special black pins and red circles. The most valuable target was obvious. The colonel was the operational brain of the entire sniper campaign. Without his leadership, the other snipers would lose their coordination and tactical superiority. But he was positioned in the center of the room, surrounded by his staff, making a clean shot nearly impossible. Lyudmila made a decision that went against every instinct she had developed as a sniper. Instead of trying for a precision shot, she would use the element of surprise to create maximum confusion and eliminate multiple targets quickly. She positioned 2 grenades she had taken from eliminated German soldiers, preparing to turn the command post into chaos. The first grenade went through the gap in the floorboards and detonated in the center of the room. The explosion was devastating in the confined space, eliminating 3 of the 4 officers instantly. But the colonel had been thrown against the wall and was still alive, reaching for his sidearm despite his injuries. Lyudmila burst through the damaged floorboards as the smoke was still clearing. The colonel was trying to bring his pistol to bear when her shot took him down. The entire German command structure had been eliminated in less than 30 seconds, but the explosion had alerted every German soldier in the area. She could hear boots running through the building and shouted orders as the enemy tried to understand what had happened. Soon, the entire post office would be surrounded by angry German soldiers looking for revenge. Before escaping, Lyudmila took a crucial few seconds to examine the German maps and radio equipment. What she found exceeded her most optimistic expectations. The Germans had detailed plans not just for Odessa, but for their entire southeastern campaign. More importantly, their radio was still functioning and tuned to the frequency used by all German sniper teams. Instead of destroying the radio, she decided to use it. Speaking in German she had learned in school, she began broadcasting false orders to the scattered sniper teams. Command to all sniper units. American reinforcements spotted in Sector 7. All teams relocate immediately. Acknowledge. The responses came quickly. Hawk unit acknowledging. Moving to Sector 7. Eagle team confirms. Relocating now. Wolfpack received. Changing position. Within minutes, she had redirected most of the remaining German snipers away from their carefully planned positions and into a sector that was covered by Soviet artillery. But she couldn't stay to enjoy her success. German soldiers were already on the stairs and she had only seconds to escape. Her exit route was the same tunnel system she had used to enter, but now it would be much more difficult. The explosion had damaged the building's structure, and debris was falling into the basement. Worse, the Germans would soon discover the tunnel entrance and might try to follow her through it. The crawl back through the flooded tunnels was a nightmare. Behind her, she could hear German voices echoing through the passages as soldiers began their pursuit. The water was deeper now, probably from a damaged pipe, and she had to swim through sections that had been merely wet during her infiltration. Halfway through the tunnel system, she heard something that made her blood freeze. The Germans had brought dogs. The sound of barking echoed through the underground passages, and she knew that her scent trail would be easy for trained tracking animals to follow. Her only advantage was her knowledge of the tunnel layout and her head start. The dogs would have to navigate the same obstacles she had faced, and their handlers would have to crawl through the same narrow, flooded passages. But dogs were faster and didn't get tired like humans did. She emerged from the tunnel system just as the first light of dawn was breaking over Odessa. The timing was perfect from one perspective, but terrible from another. The improved visibility would help her navigate back to Soviet lines, but it would also make her easier to spot for any German snipers who weren't chasing false radio orders. The journey back to Soviet positions was a desperate race against time and pursuit. Behind her, she could hear the dogs getting closer, their barking growing louder as they navigated the tunnel system. Ahead, she could see German soldiers who had responded to the explosion, setting up roadblocks and search patterns. Her salvation came from an unexpected source. The false radio orders she had broadcast were creating chaos throughout the German sector. Sniper teams were abandoning their positions and moving toward the artillery zone she had directed them to. Other German units were confused by the conflicting orders and were demanding clarification from a command post that no longer existed. She slipped through the confusion like a ghost, using the Germans' own disorganization to avoid their search parties. When German soldiers demanded to know why sniper teams were abandoning their positions, she simply pointed toward Sector 7 and said she was following orders from command. The deception worked until she reached the edge of no man's land. Here there was no cover story that would explain why a Soviet soldier was walking among German forces. She would have to cross 300 meters of open ground while German forces realized they had been deceived and began organizing proper pursuit. The crossing became a nightmare of near misses and desperate sprints between shell craters. German machine gunners had set up positions to cover the open ground, and they began firing as soon as they spotted movement. Bullets kicked up dirt around her feet as she zigzagged between obstacles, using every piece of cover the battlefield provided. Her training saved her life multiple times during that crossing. When machine gun fire forced her to dive into a shell crater, she used the angles and timing she had learned as a sniper to predict when the gunners would have to reload. When mortars began falling around her position, she recognized the sound patterns that would tell her where the next shells would land. The final sprint to Soviet lines was the longest 50 meters of her life. German riflemen had joined the machine gunners, and the air was filled with bullets seeking their target. She could hear Soviet voices shouting encouragement and return fire, but she was still in the deadly space between the two armies. She collapsed behind Soviet barricades just as German artillery began pounding the area she had just crossed. Her uniform was torn, her equipment was damaged, and she was exhausted beyond description. But she was alive, and more importantly, she had accomplished something that military experts would later call impossible. The immediate results of her night operation were dramatic. Without coordinated leadership, the German sniper teams began making mistakes that Soviet forces could exploit. The false radio orders had led several teams into kill zones where Soviet artillery eliminated them entirely. Others, confused by the loss of communication with command, began retreating toward their main lines. But Lyudmila knew this was only a temporary victory. The Germans would reorganize, bring in new leadership, and adapt to the changed situation. Within days, maybe hours, new sniper teams would arrive with fresh tactics and renewed determination to eliminate the Soviet marksmen who had humiliated their forces. However, something fundamental had changed in the battle for Odessa. The German snipers were no longer invincible predators terrorizing Soviet forces. They had been outfought, outthought, and outmaneuvered by a 25-year-old history student who had proven that even the most dangerous enemies could be defeated with intelligence, courage, and determination. News of her success spread rapidly through Soviet forces and eventually reached Moscow. The story of the female sniper who had single-handedly broken the German sniper siege became a symbol of Soviet resistance and determination. But for Lyudmila, there was no time to celebrate. Reports were already coming in of new German sniper teams approaching Odessa, and the deadly game was about to begin again. The reprieve lasted exactly 18 hours. As Lyudmila recovered from her night operation, German forces were already bringing in their most elite sniper unit from the siege of Leningrad. These were not ordinary marksmen but members of the SS Totenkopf division, specially trained killers who had been hunting Soviet officers and political commissars across the Eastern Front. Their leader was Hauptsturmführer Klaus Weber, a former Olympic shooting champion who had joined the SS in 1938. Weber had over 200 confirmed kills and had never failed to eliminate a designated target. His arrival in Odessa was accompanied by 5 other elite snipers, each with decades of hunting experience and the most advanced German optics available. Weber's approach was methodical and terrifying. Instead of rushing into position like his predecessors, he spent 2 full days studying Soviet defenses and analyzing Lyudmila's previous operations. He interviewed survivors from the previous sniper teams, examined the destroyed command post, and even brought in tracking dogs to follow her escape route. "This Soviet sniper thinks like a hunter, not a soldier," Weber told his team during their planning session. "She uses patience, intelligence, and unconventional tactics. We will defeat her by being more patient, more intelligent, and more unconventional than she is." His first innovation was to abandon fixed sniper positions entirely. Instead, Weber's team operated like a pack of wolves, constantly moving and communicating through coded radio signals. When one sniper took a shot, the others were already moving to new positions, making retaliation impossible. Lyudmila discovered this new threat when she attempted to engage what appeared to be a lone German sniper in a bombed-out apartment building. She had spent hours studying his position and timing his movements, waiting for the perfect shot. When she finally fired, her bullet found its target. But immediately afterward, 5 other German snipers opened fire on her position from completely different angles. She barely escaped with her life, rolling away from her window as high-powered German bullets shattered concrete around her previous position. For the first time since the battle began, she was completely outgunned and outmaneuvered. Weber's team was operating on a level of coordination and professionalism that exceeded anything she had faced before. The psychological pressure was immense. Weber's snipers didn't just hunt for military targets. They specifically targeted anyone who might be Lyudmila. Women carrying rifles, female medical personnel, even civilian women who moved with military precision became targets. They were trying to force her into the open by threatening innocent people. The strategy was partially successful. When German bullets killed a female Soviet medic who was treating wounded soldiers, Lyudmila felt compelled to respond. She couldn't allow Weber's team to terrorize non-combatants in their search for her, but responding meant exposing herself to exactly the kind of trap Weber had been preparing. Her counterattack came at dawn on the 7th day of the siege. Instead of trying to outshoot Weber's team, she decided to use the one advantage she still possessed: knowledge of the urban terrain. She had spent days studying every building, every basement, every possible approach route. Weber's team, despite their skill, were strangers to Odessa. Lyudmila's plan required her to abandon her rifle and operate like an urban guerrilla. She moved through the city's underground infrastructure, using storm drains, subway tunnels, and basement connections that even many locals didn't know about. Her goal was to get close enough to Weber's snipers to eliminate them with pistol and knife rather than engaging in long-range duels she couldn't win. The first target was a sniper Weber had positioned in the city's old cathedral. The German had chosen his location well, with excellent fields of fire and multiple escape routes. But he had overlooked the fact that the cathedral's foundation connected to a network of medieval tunnels that dated back to the city's founding. Lyudmila approached through these ancient passages, emerging directly beneath the cathedral's altar. The German sniper was positioned in the bell tower, focused on watching Soviet positions through his scope. He never heard her climbing the narrow stone steps that led to his position. The elimination was swift and silent, but Lyudmila knew she had only minutes before Weber realized one of his snipers had gone silent. She took the German's radio and rifle, then moved immediately to her next target. Weber's reaction was faster than she had anticipated. Within 10 minutes, he had repositioned his entire team and begun a systematic search of the cathedral area. But Lyudmila was already gone, moving through underground passages toward her second target. The second German sniper was positioned in a location that should have been impregnable, the top floor of Odessa's tallest remaining building. Weber had chosen this position specifically because it had only one approach route, making it easy to defend. But Lyudmila had noticed something during her reconnaissance that Weber had missed. The building's elevator shaft had been damaged but not destroyed. While the elevator car was gone, the cables and counterweight system were still intact. With climbing equipment taken from the eliminated sniper, she could use the shaft to reach the upper floors without using the stairs Weber was watching. The climb was terrifying. The elevator shaft was dark, filled with debris and only partially stable. Several times loose concrete fell around her as the damaged building groaned under its own weight. But eventually, she reached the floor where Weber's second sniper was positioned. This elimination was more difficult because the German sniper was more alert and experienced. When Lyudmila tried to approach his position, he detected her movement and swung his rifle toward her. The fight that followed was brief but violent, ending only when Lyudmila's knife found its target. But the noise of the struggle had alerted Weber to her location. Through the captured German radio, she could hear him coordinating the movements of his remaining snipers. They were converging on the building, intending to trap her in the same location where she had just achieved success. Weber's voice was calm and professional as he directed the operation. Target is confirmed in the Rostov building, 9th floor. Seal all exits. She will not escape this time. His confidence was justified. With 3 snipers covering the building's exits and Weber himself taking position to coordinate the assault, escape seemed impossible. But Lyudmila had one final trick that Weber couldn't have anticipated. During her reconnaissance of the building, she had discovered that the roof connected to an adjacent structure via a narrow bridge that had been built for maintenance purposes. The bridge was barely visible from ground level and appeared to be just decorative metalwork. Her escape across this bridge was the most dangerous few minutes of the entire siege. German snipers below were firing at her as she crawled across a structure that was never designed to support human weight. The metal groaned and swayed with each movement, and several times she was sure it would collapse entirely. She reached the adjacent building just as Weber's snipers stormed the floor she had just abandoned. Through the captured radio, she could hear their confusion and frustration as they realized their prey had once again slipped away. Weber's voice was no longer calm. "How is this possible? We had her cornered." But Lyudmila was already planning her next move, and she had just realized something that would change the entire dynamic of their battle. Weber's greatest strength was his team coordination, but it was also his greatest weakness. By monitoring his radio communications, she could predict his movements and stay one step ahead of his tactics. The hunter was about to become the hunted. The final confrontation came at sunset on the 8th day. Weber, frustrated by his inability to corner Lyudmila, made a critical mistake. He decided to take personal command of the hunt, positioning himself in a location where he could coordinate his remaining snipers while also engaging targets directly. Lyudmila had been waiting for exactly this opportunity. For the first time since Weber's arrival, she knew precisely where he would be and when he would be there. The master sniper's need to control every aspect of the operation had finally given her the opening she needed. The shot was the most important of her career, and she knew she would only get one chance. Weber was positioned 800 meters away, protected by bulletproof glass and surrounded by his remaining snipers. But Lyudmila had noticed a tiny gap in his defenses, a reflection angle that would allow her bullet to reach its target. When she squeezed the trigger, Weber was in the middle of giving orders to his team. Her bullet traveled the 800 meters in just over a second, finding the exact gap she had calculated and ending the career of Germany's most feared sniper. The death of Weber broke the morale of his remaining team members. Without their leader's coordination and tactical genius, they began making the same mistakes that had cost their predecessors. Within 2 days, Soviet forces had eliminated the rest of the SS sniper team. The siege of Odessa continued for several more weeks, but the German sniper threat was finally ended. Lyudmila Pavlichenko had achieved something that military historians would study for decades. A single soldier had defeated an entire specialized unit of elite enemy marksmen through intelligence, courage, and determination. Her final tally was 309 confirmed kills, making her one of the most successful snipers in military history. But more importantly, she had proven that even the most dangerous and seemingly invincible enemies could be defeated by someone willing to think differently and fight smarter rather than just harder. When the battle for Odessa finally ended, Lyudmila returned to her studies, eventually becoming the historian she had always dreamed of being. But she would forever be remembered as the woman who ended the reign of terror imposed by Germany's deadliest snipers, proving that sometimes the most unlikely heroes can achieve the most extraordinary victories.